You are listening to Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.
Hey there, welcome into another episode of the Digging In Podcast presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors. I'm your host, Kenjo Kelly, helping you get those questions answered to and through retirement. Today, back by popular demand, the man, the myth, the legend, the founder of Rooted Wealth Advisors, the champion cattle showman, the D1 college athlete, record holder for the most yards averaged by a tight end in NCAA history, Zach Gray.
I think to have an average, you have to have more than one. And I only had one.
I didn't read the fine print.
And I don't know that I'm back by popular demand, but I am excited to be back nonetheless and dig in.
I mean, it's got to be popular, right? You and John were vying for the most views on the first two podcasts. So people always interested, I feel like, to hear your story. You're the founder. You have this mystique about you. We talk about the school of Zach Gray and learning these lessons all the time.
You don't want to go there.
You just walk around handing them out. So yeah, no, I think it's definitely popular demand.
Well, I'm excited to chat and once again, kind of dig in. It's where the name came from, I believe, but always fun. Can share whatever stories are need be and try to be of some value to you listening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some news happening recently about student loan debt.
From the school of Zach Gray?
Is Zach Gray bailing out student loans? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm not.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well, it must be the other guy in the Oval Office then. So I have heard very just high-level type headline things around this. All I really know, myself not being an advisor, is kind of what I'm like hearing from different outlets and different places. I just don't know like what's real, what would be the consequences of student loan forgiveness. What would that look like? I feel like personally, for myself and my wife who have paid off our student loans, it kind of feels like we're kind of left behind going, hey, right. what's going on here? So help walk me through what's going on. Why is it such a hot topic?
Well, I mean, I think it's a hot topic because a lot of people have that debt. It's the number one unfunded debt in the world and definitely in our country. So it's interesting to take that perspective on it, right? So no doubt is it affecting folks. That all said, I think that what the next hang up with that is sometimes is that we believe that sometimes, a college degree is going to equate to dollars earned. And that's not always the case. I grew up in a blue collar family, my father worked in kind of more like a road construction business. My brother still does. Also kind of in a farming background of once again, my brother kind of went into that, arena as well. So I guess where I'm going with this comment is that I think that for so long there was this equivalent to, some sort of college degree, and that was going to equate to a solid income. And we know that that's not necessarily always the case, and it's become more and more prevalent. I think that when you think about debt and debt forgiveness, though, I think that there's a couple things that come into play. I mean, we're not here to dive deep on politics. I'm sure you listening have your own perspective on things and your own thoughts on things. And that's the great thing about being an American, right? We have our own views. However, I do think some of it's fairly political, in my opinion. And I think that that's not just my take. I mean, you can kind of turn on television and see that that's really the broad take. And I do believe that this is coming back around because, frankly, we have another election coming back around. And that is something that, maybe they're currently, from the viewpoint of Washington trying to hang their hat on. Thus, I think that it could potentially equate to votes. And I sadly think that that is the case with a lot of bills that get passed in Washington. Republican or Democratic in nature doesn't really matter. It's kind of supporting that base. Now, the problem with that, as I see it, is not necessarily politics. I don't think that you should be persuaded by some sort of carrot that's dangled. I would hope that everyone watching, that you stay true to yourself and true to your views and your morals and your thoughts and so on. But nonetheless, that is the world we're living in. The issue that I see, though, with it as being the biggest one is inflation. Because right now we're raising interest rates at an all-time fast pace, historically speaking. We've already raised rates, 1.5% in 2022, up until the point that we're doing this podcast. It's projected that we might see another big, couple bumps throughout the end of the year. And it's really all with the efforts to tame inflation. So I think that we circle back to, a couple things there. And so I'll dive into kind of like a rabbit hole on this is, well, if we don't slow spending, we're going to have a really tough time taming inflation. And we're seeing this throughout 2022. You don't have to take my word on it. You don't have to be an economist. It's just very easy to see. Even with us raising interest rates, and if we go back to late spring, we were expecting, you know what? We really attacked this. We ought to be seeing these numbers go down. And all of a sudden, it was like instead of them going down, year over year inflation went up by 0.5 point. And then it got to a point where instead of it being in the 8s, it was now at 9+% year over year inflation. And so what I think is interesting about any sort of spending, and like this could go though once again back to, hey, Trump spent a fair amount of money in Washington with COVID. Biden followed it up and spent some more. There was some more like Build Back Better bills. Say that one 5 times fast.
Yeah, no thanks.
But I think there was a lot of stuff out there, and I think that some of the reasons that they got slowed in Washington on some of that is because, once again, we knew inflation was a massive issue. So I would circle the fact that debt forgiveness is obviously something that's going to be tough. Like, I mean, how is that fair to you and your wife? I don't know. I was blessed to have a football scholarship, but though it was still a ton of work, it led to back surgeries. I wish that it would have played out different in my college days. But, I chose that path. You chose a certain path of having to be just financially responsible. I think that that's my personal issue with it is that, though I think it is politically driven. And then I think that the overarching issue, forget my thoughts or Kinch your thoughts, it's the fact that this will be a lot more spending. And if we were tracking inflationary data today, the way that we did in the late 70s, early 80s, we would be looking well past double-digit inflationary numbers that would land in the teens. And if I'm being honest, you have a young family, that's the way it feels when I go to the grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you've heard me tell this story, I think.
Yep.
I did a workshop here not too long ago. It was etched into my brain because I just got done doing some grocery shopping with my wife, which is interesting in itself. We have 4 young kids. We try to get them in the cart. Then we have no problem. We have no room for the food in the cart. But nonetheless,
you're a 2-cart family.
Oh, we are a 2-cart family for sure. Darn near 3 because we need one for the actual groceries.
Hey.
We try to keep them corralled. But when we checked out, they were ringing it up, and they got to the end. I'm stacking the groceries away. Jenna says, "Hey, you got your credit card on you." I walk over there. I look at the machine. The machine's clearly broken. Okay, yeah. Because it says $590 some, and I'm going, no. You must have rang up the other people's food.
You weren't buying the Xbox or the PlayStation.
No, I didn't have anything fun there. And I thought, well, no, like there must have been with the little plastic things.
Oh yeah,
and they must have accidentally rung up the people's food behind me. But
wow.
We weren't going to do that Starbucks thing where you buy the car behind you.
No.
But that was legitimate, right? Like, so all joking aside, what used to be, a couple $300 is literally $500+, and that's going to get us a good way through the month. Right. But it's wild. And I guess my point here is, after getting off that soapbox, is just to say, like, that's the problem with consistent spending. And that is ultimately some of the issues that we saw going back to my spring comment. We started to help out Ukraine. And I'm not here to say that that's not something that maybe is needed. They need help. But that spending, even though we were raising interest rates at an all-time clip, it wasn't enough to stop from the hemorrhaging of the spend, which is then once again back to printing dollars, inflationary concerns, et cetera. And so that's where I see the big issue of just saying, well, hey, let's cut a massive check, because that's what's already got us into this issue. And once again, not here to say that COVID spending wasn't a good thing. I think some people really, really needed assistance. I think some of the spending was maybe questionable. But the point is that we stepped in, we did what we thought was right at the time. I'm not the one in Washington calling the shots. I wouldn't want that responsibility. But it's important to understand that inflation is the key here on stroking those big checks.
And I think kind of what I think was maybe missing in my mind and maybe a lot of people's mind is the money has to come from somewhere. Even though it's called debt forgiveness, like the universities are still getting paid. They're still getting money. They're not just going to write it off and be like, hey, best of luck, great job. Like the money's got to come from somewhere. And I think that that's maybe the missing piece in a lot of people's mind. They hear forgiveness, but really more people are just going to end up paying for it, right? The piper has to be paid at some point.
You would think, right? There's no IOUs. There's no money trees that I know of anyway. And I think that, yes, right? Like then it becomes this question of, okay, so now that, you start to get these dominoes falling that direction, what's the next one that has to fall? In my opinion, it's very clear cut that it's going to be taxes. Maybe that's, something that you've, heard us talk about on this podcast, or you've seen on our television programs or our radio shows. But yeah, someone's got to pay for it somehow, some way. And so ultimately, I only see that being taxes, which of course drives that higher. And I read an interesting report, was that the cost of doing the debt forgiveness would thus be eradicated, and then of course massive cash flows for decades and decades and decades based around the tax bill that they would thus have to pass to eradicate the debt. And if you think about it in that way, there's some truth to that. Think about your own personal mortgage, right? It's not the home that you bought for $300,000 or whatever the number is. It's the fact that over the course of 30 years, you've got all this extra interest. And if you think about that in terms of those interest percentiles just being excess that you're going to have to pay on the money that you earn, and now forget they're going, hey, in the short term, we can eradicate this problem. I think that there is some politics, there's some voting, there's a lot of other reasons that I frankly are not, in my opinion, great reasons to do this. But then on past that point, they're going, hey, listen, but if we did then adjust tax code or tax bills and get them pushed through Washington, hey, not only is this going to, over the course of some time, take care of this debt forgiveness, and now all of a sudden we're rolling in the gravy, right? Because we've already paid for that. But is the chances of us reducing that back down? In the state of Illinois, I think of toll roads, okay?
Right.
You've been up towards Chicago, right? It's like, hey, we're only going to have the toll roads until we get the road paid for, right? No big deal.
Yeah, guess
Couple
what?
Years.
The road always needs fixed in a toll road.
40 years later, folks, the toll roads are still there. And I think and also a very interesting statistic, and we can kind of start to wrap up with this, is that almost 60%. I read one report that it was at 57, but let's just call it, and one that was actually just above 60, but let's just call it 60. 60% of those with debt have grad degrees. Okay. And if you think about it, there's probably some justification to that, right? I mean, if you're going to be a doctor, see now, like when you went to school, Kinch, for 8 years. wait a minute. No, no, I'm just. It should have been. It could have been doctors. But no, I mean, he didn't. By the way, folks. But I think it's interesting is that, I mean, a doctor, that is literally in the process of getting that degree. Chances of them being comfortable with carrying some debt load out. Yeah, I mean, they know that, hey, if I can get this degree, if I can have the specialized degree that not a lot of people can achieve, of course, that usually equates to some cash flow outside of it, very specific. But what I found interesting was just, out of all those folks, and it was just interesting to read it in that manner, right? So it's like, now, are we really helping those that potentially need it? Or once again, is this something that's a little bit more beyond the thinking of like foundational financial concepts? Is this a little bit more for political, banter, et cetera, et cetera? I think potentially yes, because once again, here we are saying, well, out of those that do have the debt, 60% of those, and I'm going to probably botch this up, but it was like, roughly a third of those that have, kind of gone through higher education have some sort of debt. The other 2/3 have paid it off themselves. Then once again, out of that respective third, and this was the rough numbers that I read in the second report, almost 2/3 of them, would be those with grad degrees, right? So it's like, hey, are we really making the impact that really helps the paycheck to paycheck family? I'll leave that for everyone else's debate.
That's interesting. I heard a couple things there. I know that in my family, there's a fair amount of doctors and teachers. Now, a lot of the teachers have gone on for those above and beyond degrees, the masters, the doctorates, and some of my sister-in-law is currently working on her master's. The school that she's working at has a program that actually pays for part of it. My cousin that's the radiologist, right? During his, I'm going to botch this terribly because I don't know the medical order of like resident and all that stuff. Like in his time, it was like you spend so many years at the hospital and they pay off all your medical loans, right? And so medical loans are a beast in and of themselves. So I feel like there already are programs in place based on employers or places of work like that. I don't know, and maybe that's just me, that the government should be really stepping in there. But the other thing I heard you say is we could really fix the problem if we just cap the interest rate on student loans. Did you just solve the biggest problem yourself by like capping it? Because I did read something, and I'm going to botch this statistic again. I think it goes back to like the 50s or 60s. The normal like wage has increased at a certain percent, but the college tuition since then has increased over 300%. Yeah. And so it's like one of these things is not like the other. And so that the real predatory thing about the student loan sometimes is that the interest rates.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that. And I'll just give a quick example to maybe even wrap up this thought is just, so my sister, Whitney, super smart gal, really proud of her, great mom, and also got a great degree, kind of like a physical therapy background. Got her master's, don't really understand all of the neat things that she achieved, but, did an amazing job throughout school. And I think that, to your point, she called not too long ago and said, Zach, hey, can you take a look at this? Because we're looking at this from a cash flow perspective, which I thought, okay, hey, that's really mature, and I like that. I mean, I would love to help with that. Of course, that's what we do here, right? We help people with financial issues. And so we were going through it, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, my interest rate went from like, I'm going to not have these correct, but a couple 3%. And now all of a sudden it hit a balloon time frame, and now it jumped to 8%. And that was a real number on the back end.
Yikes.
And I'm going, what? And it's like, well, some of them were secured and backed by the government. Some of them are not. I don't understand all of that world because I have not had to go to that for my own education. But it as I see more and more clients over the last 15 plus years, it's become very clear to me that not only has interest rates maybe not been capped, on past that point, you might get a couple years out of the gates where interest rates are reasonable, but then all of a sudden things can balloon to a massive, massive number. I know it did for her. She at the time had just married her husband. I said, hey guys, if I'm you, go refinance your vehicles. I mean, go get something where you can drop and suppress that interest rate in a big way so this thing doesn't, kind of get out of control. And so, yes, I think that, that's an amazing idea that should be floated around. And once again, I think maybe we can land the plane where we took off is like, I just don't know from like a fairness perspective how that sits well with a lot of folks, right? I don't expect people to take on, my financial decisions. I wouldn't expect to take on yours. And I think that that's a little bit of kind of where this rub is coming in, right? It's like, hey, if you were really, if people saw the first home that I lived in, if they saw the clunker that I drove, I had to do it within a respective budget. And I was so blessed to have a scholarship, but I've seen a lot of people, hardworking people like you, that have said, hey, my sister's example, like, hey, we will make a lot of sacrifices so we can make sure that we take care of this, get this monkey off our back, and then we can take the next step in our life journey. And I think that's a tough thing, to digest if you're the person that's already done that.
Personal responsibility, folks. Personal responsibility. Just a couple guys sitting around with mics solving the government's problems.
Yes.
It sounds like just an average Wednesday around here.
I know it. That's I mean, glad to do it, and hopefully, Washington's tuning in.
Hey, there you go. Well, thanks for your time. We are going to wrap it up. That'll do it for us today. If you have any questions about anything you heard today, give us a call. The number's 815-918-4727. I'll even make sure Zach signs and autographs a copy of his book, Your Retirement Lifeblood. We'll get that out to you for sure. Make sure you let Amber know when she answers the phone when you call that you heard about us from the Digging In podcast. That'll do it for us today. Until next time, keep digging in.
This was Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.